The MENA region today is experiencing the convergence of several distinct yet related dynamics. Interestingly, Saudi Arabia has emerged as a key driver of these developments. While this may seem surprising and even counterintuitive, these changes did not materialize overnight and reflect a series of broader local, regional, and global transformations. Recent decades have seen substantial developments in the region's relationships with global powers, the United States, Russia, and China. The most interesting changes, in my view, have been in relations between MENA governments and the United States. The most powerful military in human history proved incapable of stabilizing a country thoroughly enfeebled by a decade of comprehensive sanctions, or of preventing its transformation into an Iranian zone of influence. Of even greater concern to Washington's MENA allies was a 2015 Iran nuclear agreement. It was, from their perspective, concluded without consideration of their interests, and they felt betrayed at what they perceived to be the US riding roughshod over their national security concerns in order to satisfy its own. What was previously assumed in concerned regional capitals to be a product of George W. Bush's idiocy and Obama's perfidy, in other words, was revealed to be a more fundamental problem: the reliability and dependability of the United States in the 21st century. The response to the above developments has been diversification. Washington is still looked upon as the ultimate guarantor of regime security in times of existential crisis, but this has not precluded a strengthening of relations based on mutual interests with Russia and China. Thus, Riyadh has set oil policy in close coordination with Russia in willful disregard of the US and European energy agenda arising from the war in Ukraine. The March 2023 agreement between Saudi Arabia and Iran to resume diplomatic relations, and brokered by China, is the best illustration of regional attempts to reduce polarization. The same can be said for the normalization of relations with Damascus and developments in Yemen. While not a pioneer, Saudi Arabia has emerged as a key driver of these developments.
U.S. policy towards the Middle East is tortured or is paralyzed by what I call the two contradictions. The first contradiction is that between the U.S. foreign policy elites' overwhelming focus on containing Chinese power in the Indo-Pacific region, while also containing Russia in Europe on one hand, and trying to remain a major military and political actor in the Middle East on the other hand. The second contradiction is between President Biden's desperate effort to cloak the geopolitical struggle against China and Russia as part of an idealistic drive similar to the Cold War era, as part of an idealistic crusade to defend democracy against authoritarianism. All of this is consuming, first of all, military resources, economic resources, technological resources. The amount of time that Biden and Blinken can devote to the Middle East, it has shrunk. There simply isn't the capacity to devote to the Middle East as there once was. This is the priority for the U.S. It's no longer oil as it once was. It's no longer terrorism as it once was. It is contending with China's gains in the area and Russia's gains in the area. There's a contradiction. The U.S. possesses fewer levers of influence, and there's the second contradiction of its professed commitment to democracy and human rights as part of this mobilizing the world to contain Russia and China.
I think for me, what is really interesting when we talk about these changes is how much a Cold War mentality has overtaken a lot of analysis and how that is shaping a lot of thinking and policy solutions that are being put forward. What was really interesting was just how surprised people in DC and pundits in DC were at China's growing engagement in the Middle East. And for me, a great example of this was when there was the announcement that China brokered a deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Russia and the US have such problematic, violent, and colonial histories across the region. If you look at Iran, if you look at, in particular, Afghanistan, China has much less of that baggage. And because of that, it becomes easier for it to broker a lot of agreements. I think there are some real reasons to be concerned about the way China is growing its influence in the Middle East. What I'm concerned about is when you take a step back and look at the rise of authoritarianism around the world, having more authoritarians engage with each other like this often doesn't lead to good human rights outcomes. And what I am really worried about is the more China engages with authoritarians who have consistently shown that they are more concerned about safeguarding their own regimes than what is good for their people, they're going to use it as a talking point to distract from their own outrageous and brutal relationship with Muslims in China, and particularly the treatment of Uyghurs, and use that as a way to say, we don't have an Islamophobia problem. Look at how much we do in the Middle East.
I think China has four main goals: promoting China's influence, shaping the international order, and increasing focus of its interest in the global South, enlarging its economic opportunities there. Since China's earliest years, China's seeing the developing world as a target of opportunity. So there's a lot of continuity there. It was an important source of political legitimacy, which it continues to be. China also sees its ties with the global South as critical to its global diplomatic influence, and today increasingly to its efforts to transform, if you will, world order, so that order more closely aligns with Chinese interests, preferences, and priorities. And China sees getting the global South on board with this effort as important to its potential success. And China's actually pretty confident that the world that it envisages is one that the global South can support, a world that's not dominated by the United States and the West, and that puts the United Nations at the center of the international system. And of course, the global South is also key to China's economic rise. And you see this in China's relations with the Middle East. Very important economic ties and critical to China's energy security, a major driver of Chinese foreign policy. One of the forms that China has used, particularly effective forms, is these special multilateral groupings, these cooperation forums. And it's Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which of course Iran is now a member of since just a week or two ago. These new initiatives that China has launched, not only the BRI, which is fundamentally about infrastructure and connectivity, but these latest new initiatives since 2021, the Global Development Initiative, where China emphasizes its interest in supporting the SDGs, but also the role of the state in economic development, and focuses on knowledge transfer through Chinese channels, capacity building along those lines. The GCI, this really interesting global civilization initiative, which I think, if you examine the language, it's really a push for not just so much diversity, but relativism, and and has implications for universal values and human rights.